Ash, I'm looking forward to showing off some of your artwork for our listeners. This is kind of a bonus thing that we're doing on the web only. Walk us through your artwork related to peace.
Well, thank you, Mark. I started working on specifically peace work when I came back from Iraq, and I started my graduate work in photography in Ohio. Going to school, it allows you really time to dive into your thoughts. And one of the first projects I did was this postcards project, which combines landscapes from Iraq, photographs that I'd taken in Iraq, with photographs that I took when I returned to America. So they're a collage of American landscapes and pictures from my service in Iraq. One of the first images you see is an actual picture of me leaning up against my Humvee and my .50 caliber machine gun. Behind that, you have three different landscapes of Ohio, Wyoming, and then the cloudscape is of Iraq again. One of the ideas I was thinking with this project, the postcards project, was how when I was over in Iraq, I was so much of my time was thinking about home. And so while I was over there and I was operating a machine gun, you know, my mind was thinking about Wisconsin or the mountains out west or my family and loved ones. And then when I returned home, even though I was here, you know, a lot of times I was thinking about my service in Iraq, and I still think about that often. And so it's kind of this analogy of a soldier's duplicity in life. Another image in this project, you see the entranceway to Tulil Air Base. And this is the entranceway that I went through every day in and out of the base. And there's some large arches over the roadway, and you see the security guards, soldiers standing checkpoint. And then in the back you see this beautiful coast of Oregon. I spent about 3 years living in Oregon as growing up and seeing redwoods in Northern California and the ocean from a Midwesterner is pretty breathtaking.
And so they're bound together, too. Your service, this base where you went every day and a place where you lived for 3 years.
Yeah. When I was near Al-Nazari, it's interesting is Tulil Air Base is right next to the ziggurat of Ur, which is estimated to be about 3000 BC. The town that was around this ziggurat was the birthplace of Abraham. So every day while we were traveling in and out of our base, we would pass the ziggurat and be reminded of the immense history. Those images, years later, I've been home. I came home in 2004. I still see that ziggurat every day. I still think about that ziggurat every day. And I think about that presence, how I was in that presence. And the father of three major religions was born there and was raised there. I mean, the first arches that we ever made, humans ever made, stone arches, were created there at the site of the ziggurat. So even years later, these images are constantly being run through my head, replayed over and over again. One of my favorite images of the postcard series is one of our sergeants was taking a nap while we were doing construction, put his head down, and he was laying on some plywood. So I combined that with images of southern Ohio where there's beautiful rainbow in the background. It just fit really well, this man taking a moment in the 130-degree heat to rest, to close his eyes. And what does he think about? You know, maybe his homeland and something peaceful and serene like a wheat field. How these images culminated was I ended up printing these and made these drop boxes. So each layer, so the image of Iraq would be cut out and then put in front of the image from Ohio. And so when you looked at it, it creates a single image like this, but you can see that it's a drop box. It's an accordion-style drop box. And so each layer is a little bit separate, but at the same time, it all reads as a single image at the same time.
So that's the postcards project. And again, folks can find this on your website, ashkyrie.com. If they go there, there's the drop-down menu for art projects, and postcards is one of those. They can also look at other displays, because you've got more than what we're going to be talking about here today. So what do you want to share next?
Well, I was thinking about the installation works that I do, the works on paper. Two of my biggest projects that are ongoing right now involve understanding the images of war in the media and kind of trying to understand what that narrative explains war to be. You know, one of the things when I came back from Iraq, I was yearning for some of those images. You know, I wanted to see images like I saw during the war And the images that I saw being printed in newspapers didn't really explain the full story, I felt. It didn't explain the things that I saw and didn't recreate those images. So I was collecting every single image I could from 4 newspapers online. And I collected over a couple thousand images over a period of 2 years. And I realized is that I didn't think that they were explaining what the experience of war was very well. And they were really focusing on 3 different archetypical storylines. Like, imagine the pictures you see of the soldier, like their weapons are down. So if you're looking in the installations, you can see 3 images, one with a soldier with his weapon down. That's the benign intervention. And that's the most prolific image that you see in the newspapers explaining the war. It's usually soldiers following local customs, making the best of a bad situation, drinking tea, that kind of thing. Then there is the abstract explosions, and those are usually explosions that you see buildings blowing up from 100 or more yards away. So you don't see the live suffering that's a part of those explosions. Those could just be buildings that are blowing up. Those images are often really beautiful, colors of blues and reds and yellows. And the most edited image, the one that you see the least, is the sacrifice. The sacrifice is an image that's complicated because I think it was 2005. Before that, you couldn't even show Americans had died in the war. You couldn't show a casket. And so the stories that we were seeing in the pictures were that Americans weren't really dying. We saw numbers and maybe names, but we didn't see images. And then there's another part that's really tricky about that. When you see dead Iraqis or Afghans, they're never enemy combatants. They're always people that were killed by other Iraqis and Afghans, which is problematic because then it's saying that Americans aren't killing anyone and that only Iraqis and Afghans are killing each other. And that kind of lends to the story that they're tribal and they're the other and scary and unpredictable. It's hard to pinpoint why this is the narrative that the images are telling. Do you blame the press or do you blame the photographers that are attached to units? There's a lot of editing that goes on, but these are the most prolific images, and all of the images that I found for 2 years could fit easily into these categories. So the 2 projects I did were based on the information that I was collecting and those storylines. And what I wanted to do is explain and explore how memory is affected. You have traumatic events, and later you don't remember them the same anymore, do you? Like, things change. So one thing that I notice is that there's bits of information that are constantly lost. And so in the piece I call Untitled Media Images, you'll see people tearing down large posters of these 3 types of images. The participants get to interact, picking and tearing down the images. All the while the images are degrading, and new participants are walking up to these images for the first times, and they're already partially degraded, and so they don't have all of the information to start with, but they also wanted to pick and remove and degrade the image. And I've been lucky enough to perform the teardown piece, the Untitled Media Images, in California and Japan and Okinawa. And what's amazing was, in Okinawa was the fastest teardown I've ever seen. And I used images of the Osprey helicopter, which is a very disputed image, was one of the images, and they were very, very determined to pull it down and to tear it, remove all the image, and it really helped that the paint they used was a special anti-poster paint. So everything came off in large sheets.
So are they tearing down pieces of paint, or is this paper, is it like pre-cut like a jigsaw? How does this work?
So they're printed on large format printers, and they're just newsprint. I use a program online called rasturbator.net, and it takes an image and you can resize it using the Venn dot diagram, which is what newsprint uses to resize images in newsprint. And so the program, you can just upload any image and resize it to whatever size you'd like. And then I go to Kinko's and print it off and wheat paste the images to the wall. After the initial teardown, the pieces of the images, these are kind of like memories, are left on the floor as kind of a reminder that there was always more of an image. I offer people to take home the memories for free, the scraps of paper, but rarely does anyone grab a large chunk of them. There's always some left over, it seems.
So you said untitled media images, but also known as teardown. How does this compare to transfers of war? I mean, is it all the same thing, or what's the difference there?
The difference between the two projects is, in Transfers of War, I wanted to talk about the beautification of memory. In Transfers of War, I used print transfers. So I digitally printed the images and then transferred them and then scanned the print transfer, which is only about a 5-inch by 7-inch print. But I scanned it at a really high resolution that I could print them photographically the same size as the untitled media images. They're about the same size when they're all said and done. In print transfers, I'm talking about the beautification of traumatic events. And it's not just traumatic events that get beautified, but specifically that's what I think is interesting. And where you can have events that were traumatic at one point in your early childhood, and now you think of them as, well, it wasn't that bad, or it wasn't that severe, it wasn't that traumatic anymore. And maybe that's like a healthy process. But you can look back at things like even war and think about, well, war is not that bad, 20 years later, 30 years later. I think that every moment can become slightly idealized. And so in Transfers of War, you have some of the same images that I've been dealing with in untitled media images. But you see, when they're printed, you have the whole image there and it stays in front of you. But you still see the same actions, the soldiers walking with their weapons down, walking through a night scene. There's a small building in the background that's an Iraqi house. You can see a little bit of the moon glaring. And they're following local traditions and customs. They're doing good things. They're making the best of a bad situation. You also have soldiers sitting around a mortar, launching it, fighting back. This is an abstract explosion because, of course, you don't see what's going on at the other end of this artillery. You don't see the lives suffering. The first one is bluish. That's the soldiers walking through town. Then you have the mortar going off. Then you have Pat Tillman. Then you have Lamia Mali, who's a girl that's 7 years old getting washed. She was blown up in a car bomb accident in Baghdad. Doesn't she look like a stone statue or something? Her face is just so beautiful. There's just like the images, and then you have what they look like as an exhibition. So there's the soldier next to the kids, and then there's a guy laying down. He's kind of like this Jesus figure who got stabbed in the chest, and then there's an explosion. So you have benign intervention, abstract explosion, and sacrifice in the middle. The next image, Pat Tillman, he was tragically killed. He actually turned down an Arizona Cardinals contract, and it was worth millions of dollars to serve, and he was killed by friendly fire. And there was a major cover-up by the U.S. military. And Tillman's family were the only reason that we ever found out about it, because they kept pursuing and suing the government for Freedom of Information Acts and to find out what happened. And so he's one of my sacrifice images. I mean, there's documentary and books about him, and he was an interesting man. And it was really sad that, as any death is, it's just one of the, I don't really want to talk about that too much. So the idea of the projects is to explore how we understand war. And a lot of times we're getting a lot of our information from the images that we see in the newsprint and what's on the computer about what's going on in these conflicts. But I want people to understand the fragility of that information and how easily it's mediated. It's a media and it's mediated. Every image is cropped and chosen by the photographer, and there's a lot that plays into it. I mean, we don't have the raw information that we had during the Vietnam War, and there's good and there's bad about that. I feel like as a democracy, as a republic, the citizens have a right and a need to be informed as best as possible. And to know and to understand that the information that we have isn't the complete picture is really important to keep our perspective.
So I think you've got one more display that we're going to look at right now, Ash. What is that?
Let's look at palaver. I don't only use photography. I did a lot of my early artwork in ceramics. Palaver is a word that means having a discussion. It's a conversation where one person knows a little bit more, and so it's kind of a didactic or an educational discussion for, especially one side. This piece, installation, is life-size emperor penguins. They're life-size emperor penguins, and they're flying kites, and the kites are predator drones. This is probably one of my more surrealistic pieces. It gives a lot of a lot of room for thought, I guess. But the idea that I was thinking was every day we're paying our taxes, and we don't think about what half of our taxes go to. Everything that we send to Washington gets divvied up, and over half of it goes into military spending. And, really nothing good is created out of that. And so in here you see that we can go out and we can buy our kites and we can go flying our kites, but we don't remember that the kites are actually killing people and all this money is going to kill people. The penguins are oblivious to what they're doing, and in the center of the exhibition is 3 Iraqi men that were killed. I've never been accused of having very uplifting artwork.
Yeah, not terribly uplifting maybe, although, it's an encounter with reality, which is, in the interview I did with you, you talked about CRAS, right? Citizen Reality Avoidance Syndrome.
Yeah.
So part of what your artwork is doing is attempting to bring reality. And I mean, a rainbow in the background is not disheartening, but to realize that that sits side by side with a soldier in 130-degree heat, is it uplifting? It's just reality.
Well, thank you. And what the penguins are trying to do is approach it in different ways. It's interesting that the different comments you get for a piece like this, people have been thinking of it as an environmental piece or an anti-war piece. And I think that you're right. It's just a reality piece that we have to be aware of this.
But why penguins? They have very little to do with Iraq, I think.
Well, they don't. They don't have to do with Iraq. They have to do with us. They are the emperor penguins, and we are the empire.
And the emperor has no clothes.
The emperor has no clothes. Yeah, I was making a play with the empire, and they're the largest, most majestic of the penguins. They're about 5'5", 5'7", so they're rather large. And they're really beautiful, and it's a large bird. It's the largest penguin.
So that's the palaver display, which I suppose is not set up anywhere right now. People can catch images of it, of course, on ashkyrie.com. I've got the link on northernspiritradio.org. How does it live on other than in these images?
Well, all the pieces are still able to be put together. It was exhibited for about 2.5 years running, and afterwards I kind of retired it, and it's here at the ranch. But, it lives on in the pictures and how people remember it, and so, I'm always looking for a new way to explore, and that's already been done now.
Do you mean that if someone in Madison wanted to have this display up, you could haul it in there? I mean, it's about an hour trip for you, but you could haul it in there, set it up, and they could display it? It would be workable to do that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Or the Twin Cities, or down in Iowa City, or wherever. So places where people are listening. Decorah, Iowa, we have listeners there, and any of these people can contact you through the website, again, ashkyrie.com, and any of these displays, postcards, the untitled media images, also known as transfers of war or teardown. If you look on the website, you'll see other art projects he has as well. Thanks for sharing this, and we look forward to seeing more of it, Ash.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.